All right, we are going to be adding and subtracting decimals in this mini lesson. When we are adding and subtracting decimals, just like whole numbers, we need to make sure that our place values are lined up appropriately in order to add or subtract. For example, if I'm adding 15 plus 7, I would not add the 1 and the 7 together because the 1 is in the tens place and the 7's in the ones place. So when we are adding and subtracting decimals, we need to line up the place values, which is very easy considering the fact that we have decimals to help guide us. So in the first example, we have 7 and 100th plus 4 and 924 thousandths. So the first thing I'm going to do is put my 7 and 100th up on the board. And then I'm going to add the 4 and 924 thousandths underneath. So the 4 belongs under the 7 because they are both in the ones place or the units place. The 9 and the 0 line up because they're both in the tenths. The 2 and the 1 line up because they're in the hundredths. And then the 4 kind of hangs out by itself because there are no thousandths in my 7 and 100th. So I'm allowed to what we call annex a 0, meaning add on a 0 at the end, because that doesn't change my value when I add zeros at the end of decimals. I can add a million zeros and it's not going to change what this number was originally. So now I'm going to add like normal, and 0 plus 4 is 4, 1 plus 2 is 3, 0 plus 9 is 9, and 4 plus 7 is 11. So my final answer, the sum of these two add-ins, are going to be 11 and 934 thousandths. Okay, so subtracting, same thing. I need to line up my decimal places, and then that will help me line up all my place values. So 13 and 4/10 is what I'm going to put first. And then I'm going to subtract. Now the 8 goes under the 3 because that is in the ones or the units place. And the 3 goes under the 4 because that is the tenths. And then 7 and 2. Now in this case is different than the adding. In adding, I didn't have to really annex a 0. I could have just brought the 4 down. In this case, when I'm subtracting, I cannot just bring down the 7 and the 2. That's not going to work. So I'm going to need to annex my 2 zeros for my place values in order to subtract. So when you annex zeros, it is most important to do it in subtracting, but it's just a good habit to have in general is to always annex zeros to make sure every place value is filled with a buddy. So when I go ahead and subtract, I need to go ahead and I can count up if I wish to. Some of you would prefer to do that, and you know that the difference between these two numbers are 28, between 400 and 372. Some of you like to borrow. Just be careful when you're borrowing, especially if it's a bunch of zeros, on what you're going to borrow from. So again, this number has a 0. I can't borrow anything from the 0, so I need to go over to my neighbor 4 and borrow 1 from her. And then that becomes a 3 because the 1 goes over there. And now I can borrow from the 10, and that becomes a 9, and now that becomes a 10. And now I'm done doing all my borrowing, so now I can go ahead and subtract. And like I said, this is going to be 28 because 10 minus 2 is 8, 9 minus 7 is 2, and 3 minus 3 is 0. And I'm welcome to borrow from the 1 to make that 13, but again, I'm just subtracting again 13 from 8. Again, you can count up. 8 plus 5 make 13, or you can subtract 13 minus 8 is 5. So the difference between 13 and 4/10 and 8 and 372 thousandths is 5 and 28 thousandths.